This video is about the hard filters. And above all, I'm going to be showing you how to do these things manually, but I'm also going to cover over and over and over the best keyboard shortcuts for all these techniques that will speed up your workflows 1000%. I do it with these flashcards that just pop up on screen. This is going to be a great course. So in the Photoshop menu across the top, if you select the filter tab, there are so many powerful filters in here. And some of them look pretty silly, but a lot of them have a lot of creative and corrective features once you know how to use them. Now, some of the ones that are not very self-explanatory, I want to go in and just show you how to use them. Let's start with this vanishing point filter. When I click it, it's going to open this vanishing point dialog box, and it gives me a very discrete amount of tools. Now, looking at this, let's say I want to duplicate this one shuttered window and I want to make two more. Photoshop will actually assist you with this, maintaining the perspective of the scene. Let me show you how. If you're not already on this Create Plane tool, which should be selected by default, click it and then come over. You get this little bullseye, and I'm going to click on the top corner. I'm going to pull down, kind of following that straight line of the wood, and I'm going to click once more, and then I'm going to follow the perspective that I think is happening, right? Just kind of looking at that horizontal right in here, so I can kind of see where that's going, and then I'll come to that corner of the barn. Click. I'm not doing it at the ground level because of all the bushes. I can't really see where it stops and starts. And then I'm going to come up to this last click, matching the roof line, and I'm going to click. Now it gave me a blue grid, which is perfect. That means I chose everything correctly. Now, if I was a little off, I would get a red grid after I clicked it, or I get a yellow saying I'm pretty close, but I'm not there yet. So I just need to adjust one of the corners or all the corners until I get that blue grid, and then I need to kind of make sure that visually it matches what I'm seeing. Now, once you've created your grid, you can actually come down, and I'm just going to extend it to the ground because it's going to follow the perspective. See, I couldn't see this line underneath all the leaves, but Photoshop is maintaining that line. Now notice I didn't actually even come cover the entire side of the building because this last board is on this side of the building. So I'm just going to grab that middle one and extend it this way. And if I needed to extend it this way, notice how it gets smaller and smaller as the vanishing point goes to the horizon line, which is what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to just align this with the back of the barn. Perfect. Now let's say my goal is I want to duplicate this shuttered window a couple more times, but quickly. So I'm going to come grab this marquee tool, which we already know how to use. Notice it keeps that blue box around that wall. Now I'm going to make a really large selection, and I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key. My cursor changed to the double cursor, which means it's going to copy it and move it. And look what it's doing. See how my window is getting bigger as I go this direction? So I'm going to line up the top dark line of the shuttered window visually. I let go. My selection is still there. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key again, click, and make a third window. Kind of, again, aligning with that top dark line. I'm not going to put it down here or up here. But see how it made the window larger? I hit Command D to deselect, and I've automatically, easily created two more windows in perspective. I need to go in just a little bit and clone stamp or spot retouch, blend in this a little more, right? Which is fine. We know how to do that. And then once I'm done, I just click OK. It did a great job. I need to blend it a little bit. Unfortunately, I didn't duplicate my layer before I made my adjustments. Remember, that's a nice workflow that I always implement. As soon as I open an image, I duplicate the layer by hitting Command or Control J, which allows me to always view what the original was and or blend back to it. Now, here's something that's interesting. If you go up to the filter menu, do you see how there is no last filter applied? Remember, during this whole lecture series, you've heard me say that this top line remembers the very last thing you applied, whether it was a Gaussian blur, whether you applied a camera raw filter that had multiple adjustments. It always keeps it right here. So if you just need to quickly reapply all those same settings one time, you can click this. But notice the vanishing point filter is not there. It's one of the few that does not populate because there's such a manual selection method to establish the planes of the walls in the perspective. So how do I get back to my original image without losing all this work? Well, here's just a simple workaround. Hit Command A to select all, Command C to copy all. I'm gonna hit Command D to deselect. Now, what's the keyboard shortcut to undo the last thing you did? It's Command Z. Look what it did. It went back to the selection. That was the last thing I physically did. Command Z again, Command Z again. There we go. All the way back to the original version. Now all I have to do is hit Command V, because remember, anything you copy saves in the Photoshop clipboard RAM memory. So if I hit Command V, it's going to remember that original that I created with the vanishing point. It's going to load it on its own layer, and this is now going to give me the ability to blend these together. So I'll hit Command Spacebar just to zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. We're just trying to integrate this a bit, so I'll add a layer mask. It'd be for the brush tool, left bracket key for a smaller brush. I look over and I notice I'm painting with black for the white mask, which is great. A scrubby slider is when you hover over a word and your cursor changes to a left or right pointing arrow, and you just drag it back and forth to vary the opacity. Probably change my opacity down to like 30%, and I'm just going to try to blend in this harsh straight line that breaks the illusion. Just like this. I'm kind of trying to be irregular. And remember, if you need a straight line, make my brush a little smaller. If I click once here and hold the shift key and click straight above, and then I come back, so I'm doing the 34% per each pass. I'm gonna click once here, and I'm gonna pass all the way over to here, then back, then back, then back, then back. And then I'm gonna try to break it up a little bit. Try to get those straight lines to hit the tops of the windows. So you see what I'm doing? Again, that's mostly what you're trying to do when you're trying to sell the fake. You got to break the patterns that our eye will pick up as like, oh, something's fake here. So see how there's still an implied something weird going on? So I'm going to type 6 for 60% so I can really bring up a little bit of that original wood texture, like right there, right here, right here, right here. You see what I'm doing? Again, I'm just trying to, again, break up that. There we go. So we went from here to here, and it looks really believable. I think our responsibility as photographers, artists, designers is we should always make the image look the best possible. So if I don't have a client telling me otherwise, I'm going to Command Option Shift letter E, all of this to its own layer. I'm going to crop, probably pull in. I feel like that little stuff in the bottom left corner is distracting. I'll come in a little bit. I think I like this little isolated tree over here that the leading diagonal lines are pointing to. So I'll hit Enter. I'll pop over to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Always a great place to go in and make some overarching adjustments. Like for me, this is such a bright scene. Dehaze will kind of give me a bit more saturation. It's a great scene for a bit of clarity. I think I'd pull down the exposure just a touch and pull down those highlights just a touch. And do you see how I'm getting this posterization in the sky? That happens a lot with landscape photographers, which is why it's always a great idea to capture in RAW and process in 16-bit. But we won't get into all those things for now. So I might have to back off of this dehaze and the clarity just for that very reason that it's messing up my sky, right? However, what you can do is you can come and grab this masking tool, click the brush, and then basically I think I would just want to put a bit more clarity on the building. That's where I think there should be a little bit more of that. Now that pink overlay mask will disappear as soon as I start adjusting. I'm going to scroll down to clarity, see how that disappeared, and that's going to let me adjust those. I'll come back to the exposure and pull the exposure of the barn down just a touch, and I'm done. Hit OK. That's what I'd like for you to submit. So for this image, looking at it, I mean, we have a great point of action frozen with the super sharp shutter speed, right? I mean, this is perfect focus on the bull rider and the bull. We still got a little bit of blur from the dirt, but what's happening? Obviously, an incredibly long lens was used, which means it's going to compress the foreground to the background. So it looks like this guy is standing 2 inches behind the bull rider. And because a shallower depth of field wasn't used, like this was shot at like f11 or f16 or something like that, well, they're also pretty sharp. They're not as sharp as the rider and the bull, but they're sharp enough to be distracting in the image. So let's say you really want to isolate this bull rider in a way that it's going to go into maybe some kind of promotional material for this event. Nobody cares about the identity of these people, right? So I'm going to hit Command or Control J, and let's go use Blur for creative effects. I'm going to go up to Filter, and I'm actually going to go all the way down to the Blur Gallery, and I'm going to choose Path Blur. Now, here's the great thing. I choose the path of what is going to be blurry. I'm clicking and adding points. I'm going to click here and add another point. I double click to lock it. And let's say I click here and I click in the middle to activate that point. Trying to figure out which one makes the movement look the most interesting. Now here's something I can do. Notice this is the most active. If I come over to endpoint speed, I can drag that up to create more of a blur. See how that works? So I can click on this one and do the same thing. Just give it a bit more blur through there. See, now I've manipulated this in such a way. I'm going to get rid of the identity of this guy. Double click to lock because I want to abstract his face a bit more, which I still felt like I could see. I'm going to pull this speed up just a touch. And then down here, you obviously have some, grain you can add to the blur if it's starting to look too smooth and Photoshoppy. So you can always add just a touch of grain. You can adjust the size and roughness. So it takes a while to process, but you'll see. And once you've got it about where you want it, click OK. So it takes a while to process. So there we go. So now I have this on top of this. Now, what do I need to do? I still need the bull and the rider to be sharp. Now I have options, right? I think the way I would approach this, I'd turn off that blur layer, come back to the background, and I just choose the quick selection tool and do select subject in the cloud because I need really good results and see how it does. It's probably not going to do great because again, everything is so sharp. And remember, Photoshop doesn't know one thing from the next, right? So there you go. It can't tell the difference between this bull rider and the bystander in the background. I'll hit Command or Control D to deselect. I'm still on the quick selection tool. So I'll just do a quick paint over, getting the bull, make sure I've got all the rider, get his hand, get the feet, get this leg, try to get a little down here, just a little bit of the tail. Now, what are we noticing? It overdid it. So now I'm going to come back and quickly hold down the Alt or Option key and click the areas that it shouldn't have gotten. Photoshop's pretty good at trying to figure out those things once you tell it what to focus on. So once you think you have a pretty decent selection, I'm not going to go into refine and mask. Essentially, I'm just going to hit Command J to jump just the bull rider, hold down the Alt or Option key. Oop, looks like I missed his nose. So let's go back and select the nose right here. And once I have that nose selected, I'll Command J that. So there's the nose. I'll select this layer, hit Command E to merge it with this layer. So now my bull is pretty much all selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle back on the blur layer. I'm going to pull the sharp bull rider in front. Now what's going on? Now it looks a little weird, right? I do have some nice blur around the bull, but I need to go in and just add a layer mask to fine tune this. You almost always have to do a little fine tuning. I'm going to be for the brush. I'll probably go to 30% opacity by tapping the number 3. And I'll just come in and just wherever it looks a little fake, like right around his hand, I didn't do a very nice selection. So I'm just going to blur the edges of the hand, which would happen naturally if this were, say, flash fired. But obviously the blur is something you wouldn't normally see. And it's 6 for 60% to make this part just a little more blurry. Bigger brush, so it'd be a little softer. 3 for 30%, just to blur the tail a little more. Now, this transition is pretty bad, right? So let's go ahead and blur this in just a touch. Maybe a little bit up here. Because it doesn't need to be rock solid razor sharp, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. Now, once I've got that adjusted, I'll Command Option Shift letter E, everything to the top. And I'm going to turn off everything to go back to the original. Because now I think I want to pull in a little bit more of that original wherever it looks a little hokey, like I lost the top edge of his antler here. So I add a layer mask, B for brush, and I'm at 30%. I'll type 5 for 50% and just pull in a little bit more of that horn, just a little bit more of that horn. 2 for 20%, bigger brush, because maybe I want to come back to this, take the motion away from some of this a little bit, just to get a little bit more of that dirt coming in. See, I'm just painting around here to get a little bit more of that dirt in a way that's not too distracting. Now hit Command Option Shift letter E to jump everything to the top layer for the final adjustments. Now, as I'm looking at this, I always like to have a bigger negative space in the direction of travel. I mean, obviously, when you're shooting high speed, high action stuff, you can't think about rule of thirds and that kind of stuff. You just basically want to make sure you've got everything in the frame, which necessitates you shooting it dead center pretty much. But let's be creative. I'm gonna hit the crop tool. I think I'd probably crop in it from the back just a tiny bit, but I'm going to pull in front of the bull just a touch, and I'm going to make sure that content aware is checked. Now, when I hit enter, Photoshop's going to figure out what it should put on that empty space. It did a decent job. So now that I have that, I'm going to go to filter, camera raw filter, which is a great place to end up. And this is just a polish for a promotional brochure. So what would I like to do? Well, I'm going to pull up the clarity. I'm going to pull up the vibrance, which saturates the colors that aren't too saturated already, right? And I'm going to pull up my exposure just a touch, but retain my highlights, pull down my blacks to make those blacks a little richer. I'm going to go to effects and I'm going to add a vignette across there just to really help focus in on the writer. And I'm going to click OK. So this is what we created, and we started from here. See how that has a bit more visual interest and a little movement and motion blur that we created with the path blur. Okay, so let's see how we can use filters to improve this image. Now looking at it, obviously there's some cropping issues because again, it's very dead centered. I'm gonna do some of that now. Hit C for the crop tool and I'll just crop out a little bit of the top, and I definitely know I'm coming from the side. I may extend the right side, but for now I'm gonna leave it. Command 0 to fill in screen, Command J to duplicate the layer. Now let's go work it just a little bit. Go to filter. This time I'm gonna choose filter gallery, which is going to open its own dialog box, and it's always going to put your image in at 100%, which is usually too big. But if you hit Command or Control 0, it will fit it in the frame, or you can hit Command or Control minus to incrementally step down. I'm going to choose the cutout, and you see how the edge simplicity sort of abstracts it a little bit. So I want to blend. Yeah, I think I'll keep my fidelity at 1, number of levels. The more levels you have, the more cutouts you get. I'm going to click OK on that. I'm going to turn it off, go back to the original, hit Command or Control J, pop back over to filter, filter gallery. And every time you do this, you're going to have to reset it by hitting Command 0 or Command minus to fit in screen. And I'm going to choose the brush strokes area and choose dark strokes. Give it more of a graphic look. The processing bar is on the bottom, and then I can adjust the black intensity and the balance as much as I want. And then I'm going to click OK. So now what do I have? I have 2 filters applied to 2 different layers. Now, one thing I notice is this one is a little too dark. I could just go ahead and pop over the camera raw filter just so that I can quickly, it's like, hey, that's a little dark. Let's bring that up. And this is more cartoony. So I'll actually bring up the vibrance and the saturation. Not so much that it makes the eyes bleed, but just so that it looks a bit more graphic. Open up those shadows a touch. Click OK. All right, so now I have this cutout filter on top of the dark strokes filter. And I think I sort of want a blend of both. So what I'll do is I'll add a layer mask, G for the gradient. My default is already black to white, which is happening up here. Remember, if yours isn't, just go in, toggle on basics, and choose that first one. And if I go this way, what did it do? Remember, black conceals and white reveals. I actually want to reveal the top of this image, so I'm going to draw it the opposite way. The bigger the line, the more gradual it diffuses it. So there we go. Maybe I like this a little more. So I like that. That's a good approach. Now what I'm going to do is Command Option Shift letter E, push it to the top layer, Command minus, make sure I can see it all. And just for fun, I'll hit that crop tool. I'll extend this side just a touch. Make sure content aware is chosen. Hit enter. Let Photoshop figure out what should be there. It's organic. Kept a nice straight line here. This is all really nice. And remember, A good place to go is Filter, Camera Raw Filter to do any final edits and polishes. You can still make your corrective adjustments or creative adjustments here. For me, I want this to have more of a blue tint, something like that. I'm going to pull in the clarity. The dehaze will make things look a little bit more darker, more like a book. And I will go ahead and go to Effects and vignette it just a touch. Hit OK. Now, again, I'm a believer. You can't stop until you've gone too far. That's how you know you need to back up a little bit. So I'm going to hit Command or Control J on that. I want to make the face a bit brighter, I think. So I'm going to go down to the screen blend mode. Again, everything's 100% in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt or Option key while I add a layer mask. So I'll add a black layer mask instead of a white one. That way I don't have to invert it. Hit X to make sure white's in my foreground. And I do want to hit B for the brush tool. I'm painting at 20%. I'll hit 6 for 60%. And I'm just going to brighten up the two heads. I'm going to make a bigger brush so it'll be softer so I can do a little dodge on both of them like that. Really draw our attention to them a bit more. See how I did that? And if it's too much, if it's too strong, just lower the opacity to taste. I think that's really exciting, and it came a long way from this underexposed, very flat image. We've turned this into some kind of a graphic illustration or art piece that could be used in a lot of promotional ways. Okay, take a look at this image. Notice that it says it's a CR2, which means it's a raw file from a Canon camera. Now, if I double click this to open it inside of RAW, and I say, hey, I know that RAW has this geometry tab. Maybe it can help me fix these curved lines because it was shot with a 15 millimeter lens. See up here? It says shot with a 15 millimeter lens at f6.7 at 3/50th of a second. So if I go into geometry and I click the auto function, or I click the horizontal, or I click the vertical, do you see how it's really, really trying, but it's not quite getting there? I'm just going to hold down the Option key, which is going to change this cancel button to reset. So to undo everything I did, and I'm just going to click Open because I just wanted to open it in Photoshop. I'm going to hit Command or Control J to duplicate it. Let me show you this filter. If you go up to Filter and go down to Adaptive Wide Angle Filter, this is so great for wide angle shots of real estate, buildings, architecture, especially if you don't own a $3,000 tilt shift lens, because if you own that, you can actually do these corrections in camera. And here's the interesting part. Currently, I'm over the constraint tool. And see, look, it's already identified what the camera model is and the lens model. So it knows the exact methods of correcting the problem. So if I click on the edge of this building and I pull down, do you see how the line is curving to match the curve that it applied to the building? So it's trying to fix that. And then I can say, hey, I'm going to hover over this circular area where that one point is, and I'm going to say this line should be a vertical line. And I'm just going to draw it until it looks vertical. Now notice I have a 90-degree thing that tells me that's a vertical line. And it's going to force that line to go straight. I can do it on this one. And then I can grab the same line and say this should be a 90-degree line. And you don't have to go exactly 90. You can just visually do your best. So it looks like this is a little curved. It's going to try to straighten it, and then I need to twist it to 90 as best I can. I'm going to click on this light pole, and you see how it's matching the curve? That's again because it knows from the metadata what this was shot with. And then I can say, hey, take that line and make it 90 degrees because it should be pretty much an up and down line. And see how everything's kind of getting corrected in between it? So this looks a little off to me, so I'm going to pull that over just a touch, just to straighten that up a little bit. And I can see there, I snapped this part that was bowing the road, and I can see about this curved sign right here. And you see how it goes crazy, that it goes to red. I'm just going to try to adjust the thing that looks weird. See, it's trying to fix that. You have a limited amount of lines, but I forget what the number is, but you can see I've done quite a few. I feel like this building still isn't straight. See if that helps. Well, nope, now I've made the building too skinny. So let's see if I can pull this line over just a touch to help with that. To see if that helps. I'm gonna fix this up here, fix this here, and you click on that second one. See how I'm just straightening up things all the way around? Is there any curvature in that part of the building? Maybe a tiny bit. And I'm just gonna let that go. I'm gonna click OK. And let me turn off the background original. And you're like, well, that's not great because there's a lot of transparent pixels. And yeah, you're going to have some problems with that. So that's just the way it's going to be. But it was better than this if you don't want this distorted look. Sometimes maybe you want this distorted look. And I'm going to show you how to manually tweak this a bit. Actually, what I want to do is I want to put this in its own document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Image and I'm going to click Duplicate. And it's going to say, do you want to make it blah, blah, blah? Copy? Yes. See, blah, blah, blah. Copy? Yes. So it duplicated the entire document. So first I'm just going to drag in the crop, try to get rid of most of the transparency that's there to make my life a little easier. I feel like I can come into there without really losing too much detail. Click enter. Got this little problem over here, right? So I would just choose the magic wand tool. I'll select that transparent area. It looks like there's something blue going on there. I'll go up to select, modify, expand, about 5 pixels, just to bite into the image. Shift delete, or you can go up to edit and fill and get rid of that by hitting content aware fill. Click OK. Command D to deselect. Photoshop did a decent job. There's that little blue thing that's a little weird, but that's okay. The quickest way to get rid of it is hit the crop tool and just come in just a touch. That'd be the quickest way to fix that small problem. Now, overall, this is a nice fix if your goal is to have it less distorted, but you're using that 50mm lens because you, for some reason, like if you're in the interior of a room and you can't back up enough to get the entire scene, or you didn't want to do a pano, so use this really wide point of view lens, which again gives you the distortion on the perimeter. Now, another interesting category that in the filter you will find all the way down under other, and as you go through these, you're like, what does this do? Well, I'm going to cover just one of them, high pass, because it has a lot of functionality for sharpening. But first, I want to hit Command or Control J to duplicate my layer, and I'm going to zoom in to right here. I'm going to filter down to other and over to high pass. Now notice what it did. It converted everything to gray except where there are areas of some high contrast in here, right? So basically you adjust the radius to have as little or as much lines as you want. Typically I try to get it somewhere between not this low of a gray, but where I start to see some whites and darks coming through. So I'm gonna click OK. Now, what is the blend mode that gets rid of gray and enhances contrast? If you go down to overlay, that's the one. So I'm going to turn off this layer, the high pass layer, which is we're using as a sharpening layer. Do you see how it makes it look more sharp? It's basically just accentuating edge detail. See how that looks much more sharp? Now, it looks great on the eyes and eyelashes, but we don't want sharper pores and hairs in the cheek. So I'm going to show you a way to tweak just that. So I'm going to go back up to overlay in the blend mode and change it back to normal. And I'm on that high pass layer. So I'm going to B for brush, hold down my Alt or Option key to convert my brush temporarily into an eyedropper. And I'm going to click on like a nice mid gray. I'm going to get a little bit bigger brush. Well, my brush is too big because I can't even see it. There we go. And I'm going to paint with 100%. I want to paint over all of the skin because I don't want to sharpen the skin texture. I just want to make the eyes, the eyelashes, things like that look sharper. Do you see them up here in the upper left? I'm at the top, getting rid of all the skin. Okay, now that I've painted everywhere where I definitely don't want to sharpen the skin, I'll hit 5 for 50%, and I'll just more subtly de-emphasize some of the wrinkles under the eyes. It's okay that they stay there. I just don't want them to be I don't want them to be extra pronounced, right? But I'm not messing with the eye at all. Now I'm going to go back to the blend mode, choose overlay, turn off the eyeball. So do you see what I've done? We just really sharpened the eyes and the eyelashes to give it more drama. And this is a really powerful localized sharpening technique that you can use whenever you need it. And again, you find this in filter, all the way in the other category, and choose high pass. So this image, we want to use the Liquify filter, which you've seen me use before. Remember, your responsibility as a photographer, an artist, a designer, unless you've been given directions otherwise by a client, make the image look as good as it possibly can. And right away, I find like this dent in the wall is distracting. So I'm going to use the spot healing brush. Click once. Photoshop figured it out. I'm going to click once on this. Did an okay job, not perfect. Do you see how I messed up that shadow? So I'll hit S for the clone stamp tool, Alt or Option, and click to the right and pull this over with a bigger brush. See that line? I'm just going to put that dark line on the edge of it and paint all the way across. Now, when I went too far, it started picking up the bad part. So I'm going to come from this side, Alt or Option, click. All right, so I got rid of that problem pretty quickly. Hit Command or Control J to duplicate the layer, and it looks pretty noisy. If I go into Command 1 to 100%, yeah, you can definitely see that noise. I'll zoom in even more. So you definitely see the noise there. We'll fix that at the end. First, let's do a little bit of Liquify. Go to Filter and down to this special category of Liquify. This is already a really muscular guy. I Command minus just to shrink it a bit. Now, if for some reason, who knows, maybe this is a dating app, maybe this is a promotional ad for some kind of bodybuilding protein drink, whatever. But let's say you wanted to adjust the musculature and size of this bodybuilder. So I'm going to go up first to this forward warp tool, and I'm going to say, the traps could be a little rounder right here. And you've got to know anatomy to understand when it's too far and when it starts looking really weird. I'll make a bigger brush. Maybe I just want to pull out those triceps. And again, this is subtle. This is all small, subtle stuff because it can look super fake, super fast. And pull up the bicep, just the touch. Like that little touch added 10 pounds of muscle. And then I can make this arm bigger and make his rib cage and abs a little narrower. I can pull this out just a touch. I can make that shoulder just a touch rounder, make that a touch taller, make this a little up, make this a little bit around, pull in the shorts just a little bit, just because it creates a cleaner line for the ad. And then I can zoom in a little with a smaller brush, again, just following the musculature, and say I just want a little bit more of a dent right in here. So it looks like, got to be careful not to get anything weird happening though. Again, subtle movements, taking a quarter or a half of an inch off something really helps. Now, if I want to make his chest larger, there's a bloat tool in the Liquify, and there's a ton of tools you can go through and take a look at. Like the pucker tool, fashion industry uses that to make noses smaller. The bloat tool is a really neat way to adjust the eye size, although there's some face-aware Liquify attributes over here that are really nice to use as well. But I'm just going to choose the bloat tool, make a big brush, and click over his chest just to give him a bit more muscle mass over his shoulder. Do you see how that is very subtly? Well, it's pretty dramatically. I mean, we just added probably 15 pounds of muscle there. I'm going to click OK, turn that off. Boom. Boom. We took an incredibly muscular guy and we just refined his physique to make it look a bit more exaggerated, which is what happens in those before and after ads for weight losses. Most of those photographs are taken on the same day. So again, this is an introduction into how you can use Liquify to adjust small things to make them look however it is you need them to look for whatever purpose. I'll hit Command or Control J to duplicate it. I'm going to drag over some lines from the ruler so I can just have some ideas of what should be straight in the image. I know I've covered rulers in previous videos, but not in this specific video. So again, if you want to activate your rulers, just go up to View and go put a check mark beside rulers. And once you do that, you're going to get the rulers on the left side and the top. And then in order to get a ruler, all you have to do is click inside that ruler space and drag out. And that's how you get these guidelines that I'm using right now. And then I'm going to hit Command or Control T to activate the free transform, which again, you can find under Edit, Free Transform. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to hold down the Command key, which lets me alter the shape or size. And I'm just going to try, pull that up. I'm just trying to get that middle thing straight. And pull that a little this way, this a little this. Now there's a balance. I'm not going to be able to get everything perfect, right? But again, this is just for some subtle tweaks. if you think that's all you need. I'm going to lock that in by hitting enter, and then I'm going to hit Command or Control T again. I'm going to right click in here and click warp. If I hold down my command key, because I'm not getting what I want, see how I get this little intersection grid? I'm going to click it right there and click it right here. I have 2 points. Now I can click on that point and just, do you see how that was looked weird and tilted up? I'm just trying to make it look normal, like more of what I think it should look like. And click OK. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that definitely looks a lot better. To manually fix something that was this messed up, this is a nice fix. And again, you turn the background layer off. Little problem. Hit C for crop. Come in and crop so you don't have to do a lot of retouching or filling. Hit enter. I'll go up to view and guides and clear guides because I don't want to see those anymore. Command 0 to fit in screen. I like where this is going. Go in the camera raw filter and reimagine the scene. What do you think would look better? For me, I think I'd like to have a bit more of a blue tint. The bottom is so orange, it's going to stay there. I can recover my highlights, pulling this over, and pull up my vibrance and maybe open up my shadows. That's really powerful. Click OK. So we turned this image into this image. All right, this is a good case of high action shot. There's some frozen movement here, but it could be more dramatic. So what do I mean by more dramatic? Well, let's blur the background so it's more of an effective panning type shot. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. I'm also going to go ahead and go into the quick selection tool and turn on select subject. I'd like to have the horse and the rider on his own layer. And I'm going to have to command the spacebar to zoom in a bit because spacebar to zoom down. Toggle on the polygonal lasso tool and hold down the shift key to add to this selection so I can quickly go ahead and just select. I think this will be quicker than trying to quick select this because this has got so many straight edges. Go back to the quick selection tool. See, I missed the back of his head. And once you have it about where you want it, just hit Command or Control J, just so that he's isolated on his own layer. Oh, what did we also probably want? We probably want this ball over here, right? So I'll go back here. I'm on the quick selection tool. Select the ball. Command J it up to its own layer. So now that everything is isolated on its own layer, the first thing I'm going to do is hit Command or Control J again. So I've got 2 layers here. The first one, I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and I'm going to drag my distance way up, and I'm going to adjust the line to kind of mimic the line of the horizon just to get some of that motion going. Now notice how it stretched out the horse motion, which touch weird. So I'm going to turn that off, go back to this second layer, go up to Filter, Blur Gallery, and Path Blur, and pull the speed up, edit my point speed, adjust the taper, and I'm going to click OK. All right, so now I have a couple of different adjustments. So I'm going to name these Path, Motion Blur. So I like the motion blur back here, but I like this in front, right? So I'm going to turn on the motion blur, add a layer mask, B for brush, painting with black at 70%. So I want to fix the front. I don't like how the horse's blur is coming in front of the legs and the body. That looks weird. I don't like how it's on top right here. I think the tail area looks a little odd. I'm going to kind of tweak that a little bit. The shadow in front of the legs I don't like. I don't like the shadow behind the legs, actually. Okay, now what? Right now it looks a touch fake, right? Because there's no way that guy would be that perfect. So I'm going to hit Command or Control J, go back up to Filter, go to Blur, Motion Blur. See, now I'm just going to blur him, but not so much, just a touch. Just so he's not razor sharp, which wouldn't happen typically in a pan, especially with the up and down moving object. So I'm going to add a layer mask. And actually, I think I'm going to invert the mask by hitting Command or Control I. I'm going to hit X to get white in my foreground. And I'm going to paint with 50% by hitting the 5 key, big brush. I'm going to click on the back of the guy so that the back of the guy is just a touch blurry. The back of the horse, just a touch blurry. Definitely the legs down here. A couple of clicks on the hooves just to make it blend in a little bit. Maybe the front of the hoof would be okay. Maybe the top of the horse, maybe this area in here. Maybe there's no way that stick would be perfect. Maybe I'd get that just a little bit of motion blur happening. Again, we're just trying to sell the fake, just to make it look like he's really going fast. Now, what about this ball over here? How integral is that into the shot? So you have to kind of decide. Let's do the same technique. Duplicate it and just go up to filter and choose the last one. Has the same motion blur we just applied to the rider. Okay, that looks pretty good. Add a layer mask, smaller brush, paint with black. So X, and just paint in the front of the ball just a little, just to make the front a little sharper. Looks like there's some weirdness going on there. So that's probably just when you go back to the original ball, add a layer mask, and just get rid of the selection weirdness. I'm going to try to get rid of the extra stuff that shouldn't quite be there. We just want the illusion of a ball shape that's sort of rounded, that's moving fast. Boom, ready to go. Now what do? Compress it to its own layer, Command Option Shift letter E. Let's go up and do our tweaking. We're putting our style, our brand. For me, I always like to see, could I saturate this a little bit with just the vibrant slider? Would this be a good one for texture? I can lower the contrast just a little bit. Go to effects, add a vignette, keep our eyes focused, click OK. So we took this fairly uninteresting shot and we gave it a lot more motion and action. And I would suggest, as always, when you crop something, you can make it better. So C for crop, make this a more narrow. I think it'd give it a bit more speed, have a bigger negative space in the direction of travel, putting him at rule of thirds. I mean, break the rules for sure. But man, from the beginning, start utilizing rule of thirds, leading diagonal lines. Like, do you see the leading diagonal line from the ball through this light area up to the rider? I mean, we're geared to read from left to right in Western society. So take advantage of all those visual cues to really lead your viewer and do whatever you need to do to make your photography more exciting. All right, let's go ahead and pop over to the oil paint filter. Now, obviously, there's some problems here as far as extreme curvature from an extreme wide angle lens being used. But if I go to File and File Info, you're going to see there is no camera data. This is a stock shot, and the camera owner removed all the camera data, so Photoshop's not going to have any metadata to pick up on to help fix this. And that's okay. I'm not even going to worry about it for this image. I'm just going to Command or Control J. Now, one thing I notice is it's really sharp back here, but probably because of the motion of the fish and the shutter speed used, I would suggest maybe that's why the fish is just a little blurry. That may not matter. We're going to go up to Filter, down to Stylize, and choose Oil Paint. Now notice up here is where you see it happening. So bristle detail, I like to pull down, pull up the scale, see how it makes this looks a little exaggerated, so I'll pull that back down. But I want this to be very stylized, and pull up the cleanliness and click OK. Do you see how that really accentuated things? Now I'm hit Command or Control J, and I'm going to go to the overlay blend mode. This is going to give me that crazy contrast that I like. So that already made the fish look a little bit sharper. I like the direction that's going. I think what I'll do is I'll just Command Option Shift letter E all the way to the top, go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and let's just make some subtle adjustments. If I go into the basic, this is already obviously more of an illustration, so we can go a little crazier with the colors. Maybe I want to pull up the shadows just a touch, pull up the clarity, really emphasize those painting textures. If it's losing some highlight detail or color channel information, you can just pull that down. Now for me, I'd probably go up to this masking feature, hit the brush, bigger brush, and just paint over the fish a little bit, because I think I'd want to make the fish just a little brighter. I don't want to lose any highlights, but just make it a little brighter. And I like where that is. That's the oil paint filter. You can really make an image that maybe has some problems, or you need more of an illustration or a background image for text. This is a nice technique to get there pretty quickly. Okay, I'm going to show you one of my favorite techniques. When you open an image and you look at it and it's like, this just needs a little bit more drama, a little bit more saturation, a little bit more contrast to make it more of a graphic image, hit Command or Control J, hit the overlay blend mode, then go up to filter, down to blur, and go over to Gaussian blur, and dial in. Sometimes I use this for a dreamy effect, but sometimes watch how as I pull it further, see how she's now back in focus. Here she's super high contrast and starting to look blurry, but now all of a sudden she looks like she's more in focus. It looks even more dreamy. A balance of what it is that you want. I want this to be a little bit more high contrast. So I'm going to click OK. Just added a bit of drama to this image. Already an exciting image. Hit C for crop, because again, most things can be improved by cropping. I'm going to pull that in just a touch. I like that X configuration at the top, but I'm going to pull this down just a touch. Click OK. Command Option Shift letter E to the top, and look at it. What's distracting to you? Well, for me, I mean, you don't need to retouch out everything, but I don't think this little orange thing in the background helps. I don't think this bright highlight caught by the flash hidden behind the model is helping. And I might like this little blue highlight, but let me see. Nope, I think it looks better without it. Probably so does that one. And so does that little white thing coming in from the edge. So there we go. We've cleaned up this image very quickly, given a lot of drama. So now we can put some white text right up here. And if we want to brighten her face a bit, we still can. Hit Command or Control J. Screen blend mode, way too much. Hold down the Alt or Option key, so I'd add a black layer mask. B for brush, X for white in the foreground. Right bracket key for a bigger brush. I'm at 50%. I'm just do one click on her face. Smaller brush because I want to click more on the shadow side of her face. I'll paint right there, paint right there, paint right there. Now I'm going to do a big brush, so soft and diffuse at 30%, maybe a bigger brush. So we're bringing more attention to her face. Probably a little too harsh on the light side of her face, so I'll make a smaller brush. X to get back to black, and I'm going to paint back over. See, I'm painting back in that detail where it's starting to go white, just as a balance. And that's your job. Figure out the best balance for your image. Hey, if you like this video and it helped, you can help me. Smack it, whack it, and crack-a-lack it. Take care. I like subscribers.
That's awesome. Whoa. Yes! Oh my god, I did. This is...
Hey, you stayed to the end. You know what that means? You're awesome. I'm talking about you. Now get out of here.